Hello and welcome to today's webinar. The topic being powering up your databases. This event is part of the Nutanix webinar series entitled Power Up Your Databases. This is the sixth of seven in the webinar series. So thank you so much for joining us on today's event, brought to you in partnership with Nutanix. We've got a really cool event lined up for you today. So again, thank you for being here. Before we jump into it, just a few things that you should know about the event. My name is David Davis, and I'll be serving as the moderator on today's webinar. We want this to be an educational event, and we encourage questions. You can find the questions box. It's there on the left-hand side of your audience console. I can call your attention to it that way. Of course, we welcome all the hello and good afternoon messages from across the United States and around the world, but we also want your technical questions related to running your databases, all the challenges that I know that so many companies out there are facing when it comes to managing data and databases. So keep those questions coming, and we'll do a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event. We also have a number of handouts there in the handouts tab. I want to call your attention to. There's a link to the free test drive of the Nutanix Era solution, the Nutanix Era solutions brief, and the Nutanix Era homepage. So make sure that you check those out before you go. The free test drive of Nutanix Era is a fantastic opportunity for anyone out there who wants to try out a Nutanix Era for yourself. You can do it completely, in your web browser for free, easily, and just see the power of this solution for yourself. Seeing is believing, as they say. And finally, at the end of the event, I'll be announcing the winner of the Visa $300 gift card prize. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms can be found in the handouts tab. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Chris Papp, Solutions Marketing Manager at Nutanix, and Mr. Damian Ivans, Nutanix Era Sales Specialist. Chris and Damian, great to have you on the event today. I'll first hand it off to you, Chris. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction. My name is Chris Papp. I'm a database product marketing manager at Nutanix. And what I plan on going through today, just briefly, till we get to the good stuff, is we're going to go over a couple key areas of focus for databases. We're also going to be talking about the problems that's associated with legacy infrastructure and how that affects databases. As the title suggests, the new era in database management, where I'll discuss our databases solution platform, which is called Era, and what the new release, Era 2.0, which just went public last week, what that brings to the table. And then my excellent colleague and expert in databases and all things Nutanix, Damian, will do an actual live demo and walk through the different use cases and scenarios of using Nutanix Era. And of course, don't wait till the end to ask questions whenever, but we'll leave the end for any stragglers or anything that comes up at the very end of the presentation to answer as many questions that we'll have time for. So when I talk about databases as it relates to Nutanix, so what I like to start out with is kind of talk about the four key areas we should be focusing on for modernizing and how you run your applications and databases in order to deliver value to the business, because that's key at the end of the day. And so in no particular order, delivering consistent performance is usually at the top of the list when we talk to customers. I'll speak for, when I say all of us from Nutanix, is, performance is usually the top thing that comes up, how to deliver that. And we do that from just our platform is web scalability, it's infinite scale, it's scale out. And we've proven that over the last 10 years, no matter what the workload, but specifically for database applications, we continuously, no matter how far you scale up or scale out, we can provide low latencies, high performance at minimal cost. So that's key. The other portion of that is adaptability. How are you changing to the environment? What does that mean? that as your workloads shift, as your requirements from a performance and a business requirements change, how are you adapting to that quickly? Are you able to adapt to that quickly? Those are keys from an IT perspective. And your platform, your database platform, should support that line of business. I mean, that's who you're answering to. And then resiliency, I think honestly that should probably be at the top of the list, because no matter how fast or how fast your environment is or how high performing it is, if it is not resilient and is not available, then nothing else matters. And again, our platform allows you to take outages and still stay up and not have any of those unexpected outages that you're scrambling at 3 a.m. to fix, or first thing in the morning when you walk in the door. But we also prevent those from having simple one-click upgrades, so you have the best benefits and the best performance, and without having to take the entire environment down. And also through the use of Era, by getting ahead of key vulnerabilities, you're able to patch, right? And so you're able to stay resilient, so you're not having to have a 0-day vulnerability stop everything in its tracks. And then at the end of the day, the focus is on the business and what those apps that serve the customer, whether your customer is the end user that's from a retail perspective, or your customer is the actual organization, the applications group from a database or IT perspective. You want to switch the focus to where people aren't talking about the performance of the database. They're talking about the performance of how well the environment works as a whole, right? So whatever they're using those databases for, that this focus is put on delivering to those applications. And so you can put the application back on that, put the focus back on those applications, so that you can answer the line of business requirements. So a couple of things that when we walk through on this particular slide that I'll talk briefly about is the problems with legacy infrastructure that affect the 4 things that I talked about in the previous slide, from an infrastructure, process, and people. So from legacy infrastructure, when we talk about, is generally separate SAN, separate compute, separate networking, and then siloed infrastructure. And all that leads to, especially from a database perspective, is slow provisioning. So when that requirement comes in, you're slow to respond. Inconsistent performance, because you have over-provisioned areas and under-provisioned areas, large upfront CapEx costs. You have little time for innovation, right? Because what you're coming into, you have a very complex environment that requires tons of troubleshooting, long time to resolution, because you have these siloed environments and pocketed teams. You have most organizations will have like a separate SQL Server team, Oracle database team, a separate Postgres team, and then trying to get those teams to work with the network engineering team and system services team. That's a lot of, hot potato of problems that can happen because they don't have a central control plane to manage everything. It's very difficult to scale. Like I said, you have these siloed environments that are over provisioned, and companies try to make large upfront CapEx purchases to scale out for 2 to 3 years, that sometimes 5, and sometimes they won't make it past 1 because their environment's growing so fast. So requiring time consuming forklift upgrades to change out storage controllers so they can continue to scale out and answer the call for performance. And these are that requires a lot of downtime and a lot of outages, and a lot of working till the wee hours of the night, affecting both the team and the business. Speaking of the business, it goes without saying, if you have that much complexity, you're not gonna be able to maintain your SLAs. No longer are the businesses, is it palatable to wait a week or 2 weeks for a database server to be provisioned with the database is set up? In the era of the cloud, IT itself is expecting instant return on like an ask, right? So what used to be days is now hours. What was hours is now minutes. And so that expectation from the public cloud has led itself into other areas of private cloud. It's pervasive wherever that your data resides, and that's everywhere. That's what we're finding out. So because of all that data that organizations are needing to capture and hold on to. That data is spread out and put in databases across both public and private cloud, and that costs a lot of money. So that costs a lot of money in terms of storage costs. For instance, if you're trying to have tier one databases and retain all that data, to keep that performance is very expensive data. And if you combine that with the fact that for every one production database, there's 10 copies of that data or 10 copies of that database in the environment for production, dev, and test environments, it comes out to a lot of expensive arrays that you need in your environment to maintain, and lots of management complexity that's kind of combined with that. So this leads us why we created as a company Nutanix Era 2 years ago. So what we did was we wanted to build on the HCI stack that we were already doing, having success with, and move up that stack to more of a database application layer. And so what we did was we built a database as a service that was custom made for Nutanix HCI. And that gave us 4 pillars that we could immediately have an initial impact on. And that was quick provisioning, deploying database servers, deploying database instances in minutes with best practice from both the database vendor and Nutanix. You got the best performance every time, and we're automating that. So there's, we're removing that, manual error-prone actions that, take, tons of pressure time to troubleshoot. We were taking care of, cloning and snapshotting. And so we were saving storage because we're able to plug right into the Nutanix APIs for our distributed storage infrastructure. So instead of having to clone, take the time to copy databases for dev and tests that are, terabytes in size, we're able to take the ease of, copy and paste from a desktop and apply that to databases and take a snapshot or a clone. And it's taken up a fraction of the size of that original database with no performance loss. So there's no penalty for taking multiple clones. So you're able to keep your database copies up to date across your dev and test environments. And you're able to keep backups, more frequently because you're not having a performance hit with that. So that means that when you do come into a database protection level event where somebody blew away a database table, you can now restore that with 0 to no data loss. And we'll demo that here shortly. And also there's a full lifecycle management. There's not just the spin up and spin down of a database, but that's patching and maintaining it along the way. A lot of the high profile instances that have made the news recently have been around databases and critical data that's been exposed and is floating out there from passwords, financial data, to HIPAA information, because that database got hacked. And one of the more high profile cases was that the company was actively patching their database environment. They just hadn't been able to get all of them done by the time the data on a particular database server was actually owned and compromised. So we actually provide lifecycle management and patching across the board for multiple database engines. And so the benefit of running, a database service on Nutanix is that we plug right into the underlying platform. So, we're able to take advantage of the block services, the compute services, object level storage and file services that we provide as a company, but then, merge that with things such as flow. So you're able to, have microsegmentation. In case you do have a database server that needs to stay up, but you need to monitor it for a security compromise, you can actually microsegment that out and keep that segmented until it gets updated and validated by your compliance team, and then put it back out in production. So lots of general use cases for this. So just briefly, what I'll touch on is those benefits of having provisioning in minutes and patching and a central control plane for all your different database engines. Saves time and money, right? We're making it simple, fast, available, secure, and efficient. And that's where you see that number of 291% ROI, or Era essentially paying for itself up in 6 months. It comes in a couple different areas. When we say we speed things up, to put a number on that, when we work with our customers, we're actually able to increase, on average, the speed of database provisioning by 97%. And then because they're able to scale out so fast or deploy so fast, we're also able to improve the ability to clone without taking a storage or performance penalty hit. And we're at still being able to clone faster and provision faster. We're still able to reduce the requirements for copies and backups, storage requirements, that is, by 60%. It's a huge savings there. And then if you add to the fact that you're now able to patch your entire database estate quickly and efficiently and manage it, across different database engines, Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server, you're avoiding losses of downtime for critical databases, and so you're reducing the risk of having downtime equaling $35,000 an hour, right? So, but last but definitely not least is by implementing automation and standards and leveraging a central control plane to manage your database environment, we're also able to reduce off-hour workload by 50%. So essentially, we're giving weekends back, nights and weekends back to your team that's running that. So whether that's a dedicated DBA team that is trying to modernize the environment or trying to roll out patches, we're giving them the time back, or the accidental admin, database admin who knows the most about a database environment, but they're the jack of all trades, where they're managing the entire environment. We provide that extra hand to ensure that it's stable, ensure that it's fast performing, and they're just not putting out fires all day long. So they're getting their time back to focus on projects that affect the line of business in a positive way. So recently, like I said, leading up to this, we had a new release. Just October 6th, we went public with it. It's a huge release for us in that it, in a nutshell, I will say that it enables us to provide database services wherever your data resides. And that comes from some key new features in Era 2.0. That's multi-cluster support. So that means that now with the 2.0 version, that if you have databases residing on different Nutanix clusters in the same data center or globally from a central Era management console, you can actually deploy and clone across different environments. So truly expanding out the capabilities of provisioning and cloning at a global level. And then with the release of Nutanix clusters on AWS, which is bare metal Nutanix, which is a bare metal Nutanix environment sitting on AWS, we can extend this out now to a hybrid cloud too. So imagine running your environment where you're managing databases, different database engines on your private cloud, and then in AWS on a global scale, and managing it all from one console that includes your compliance, your policies, your backups, everything in a nutshell, that you can manage your databases fast and efficiently. You can all do it from Era now. So we extended database protections, so you can actually do in-place restores that I talked about earlier. Restoring a database table that might have been kind of wiped out by accident. You can do that for Oracle, SQL Server, and PostgreSQL quickly and efficiently with near zero data loss. We've extended database server patching to include SQL Server and Postgres now. We had it first with Oracle. And so we're extending that, across multiple database engines. We also announced support for SAP HANA, provisioning and coding support for SAP HANA. So that's big as we extend our database engine support. And then as we've been supporting Postgres for a while now, but we are now providing end-to-end Postgres support for the community version of PostgreSQL. So what that means is that if you deploy and manage Postgres, the community version of Postgres, with Era, you can actually call us up for all support for Postgres. We will provide 24/7 follow-the-sun support, and we will assist you in any issues you may have, not just from the Era side, but actually from a Postgres side. So big news for that as we expand on the open source community support for Postgres. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this over. So we're going to let Damien jump into a demo and walk through all those features. And you can see firsthand the power of Nutanix Database as a Service.
So I'm gonna walk through a demo. Hi everybody, my name is Damien. I'm gonna walk through a quick Era demo and kind of express a little bit of the concepts that Chris talked about during his presentation. I think, the look and feel of Era is very similar to the one you would expect from Prism Central, the Nutanix Prism Central or Nutanix Prism Element, which are the graphical interfaces of the entire infrastructure. And you have a quick view, an HTML5, very simple interface on what's going on in your database world, right? So, for instance, here we've got 8 databases, 8 sources. So this would be equivalent to 8 production databases, and I'm spinning off 48 clones, right, of those 8 databases. Now, uh, those 48 clones are spread across, I got 32 clones that have less than 30 days time-wise, then 10 clones are between 30 and 60 days, and then 6 clones are more than 60 days, right? So that way I can, get a good sense of the life cycle of the databases inside of my data center. And, I can also keep track of what's going on and when would I need to kind of like be a little bit more aggressive on the refresh side of the databases and of the clones, right? You see an overall savings. So we do massive savings on the storage side, right? So because Era is designed for Nutanix HCI, we leverage all the efficiencies that AOS or our operating system will give you, right? So when we're doing clones, we're not really duplicating or triplicating the data. We're pretty much just turning pointers into read-write, right? So the environment becomes more efficient. And what that turns into, or pretty much what that means is, creating clones for your environment, creating copies for your environment becomes something very inexpensive from a storage perspective, right? So now you can just spin them off pretty much anytime you want. Um, the next thing you see here is you see, a list of, the 8 or 10, biggest databases. So you see the source database. So here we have in this environment, like I said, 8 databases spinning, Oracle engines, PostgreSQL engines, Microsoft SQL, MariaDB, MySQL, and SAP HANA, which are pretty much all the database engines that we support. You see the size of the database, then you see the size that the snapshots are using, the amount of clones per database, and then the space that the clones are using. So you see here, for instance, I've got 10 clones, and all of the 10 clones are using about 369 gigs, right? So it's a very, very efficient way of cloning and provisioning database environments. The other thing you see here is which cluster the Era VM is running. Era is just a virtual machine, sort of a, if you would, like a VM appliance that would install on a Nutanix cluster. It can, connect to Nutanix clusters that are either using, ESXi hypervisor or HV hypervisor, and, and have multiple of those, right? So as Chris said, that was part of, the important release that we do now is that Era does support multiple Nutanix clusters connected to it, and hence can provision and can manage the snapshots and move the snapshots across different clusters inside of Geo or inside of multiple data centers. Now, if I click here on the dashboard, I see, the tabs and some of the roles which are spread out across different menus. You can select to have, infrastructure admins who will be able to spin off database server VMs, and you can have like DBAs that will only see the databases themselves, right? So those are the two most important ones. You also see Time Machine, which is where we're going to manage our snapshots and our log catch-ups and all that stuff. I'm going to also go through that. Then profiling, which is where we're going to bundle the software. I'm just going to brush through that one very quickly, to not kind of overrun on time as I am presenting. SLAs, so every time you create a database using Era, you tie that database into an SLA. Even if you're just registering an existing database into the Era environment, we will tie it to an SLA. And what that means is that we'll take care of, the snapshots and the logs according to the SLA you have defined for that database, right? Let's say it can be a platinum SLA where I'm going to keep all of the logs and I want to do a restore to any point in time for the past 14 days. And after that, I'm just going to keep one snapshot, right? So you can select that type of behavior. And here you have the operations on the environment. So let's start and drilling down into databases. So here I got my database view, and from this environment I can actually see what databases are, which database I have provisioned, and I can drill down into them, see what's going on. For instance, here I got my CRM database, which is provisioned inside of an Oracle RAC environment. It has 3 servers attached to it. Gives me a little bit of the sense on what SLA it's tied to. So here it's a prod. environment. So I'm doing 14 days of continuous retention, name of the cluster, so on and so forth, right? So you see a quick overview on where the database is provisioned. You can choose from here to provision, for instance, either an Oracle Signal instance or an Oracle RAC instance. Same thing with SQL. Now, if you're doing Microsoft SQL or even Postgres, we can choose to create always-on availability group across multiple Nutanix clusters across different geos. And you can even choose after that from where you want to take the snapshots and from where you want to take off the clone. So for time's sake, I'm just going to do a single instance of an Oracle RAC. I'm going to create a new VM server. I could potentially also choose to, spin off the database into a pre-registered existing, database VM server. But in this case, I'm just going to create it from scratch. So I'm going to go, ORCL test. You might want to use some description here. I would choose which cluster I want to deploy it. So, if you're using Nutanix clusters on Amazon, you can choose to deploy it on Amazon. In this case, I'm going to keep it on the Tomahawk cluster. Here, I would select the software profile. So in this particular environment, we only have 12 and 19, which are the most common ones that we're running into right now, right? But we do support more versions of Oracle as well. So I'm going to select 19C environment, compute profile, which is just a bundling of the cores and the amount of CPUs that I want in this database. For instance, if I choose a large compute profile, this will mean 4 vCPUs, 4 cores, and 64 gigs of RAM. Right? So that's what I'm provisioning. If I go with a medium, this is going to be a little bit less. Right? So let's go with a large one. Then networking profile. Depending on what architecture of database you're provisioning on top of the Nutanix cluster, you can set up different profiles. If you're doing an Oracle RAC, chances are, you're going to want to spread the different VLANs for, let's say, the heartbeat of the Oracle, right? You want to separate also, database traffic or the admin traffic from the end user traffic, so on and so forth. But in this case, since a single instance, we're bundling everything into a single VLAN, a single network. Well, enable high availability if I want to use ASM. So here you can choose that. I'm going to skip that. And then, the public key, so for when you want to logging into the server. Now here, you will get, database name, right? System ID, and then system password. Right? So I would just input some more of the data. Now, here I can choose the size, but the interesting thing about Era is that independently of the size that you choose, let's say, if I want to do, say, 3 terabytes, Era will take care of the disk layout, which is a major pain point that you have in database environment today, right? So usually the infrastructure admins will not consider best practices, and when the DBA requests a 3 terabyte drive, they will get only 1 drive. Best practices usually requires for you to spread out the workload across multiple drives, and hence Era will take care of that for you, right? We'll automate all of that procedure. We have all of the best practices built in inside of the Era appliance, and you can just choose the size without having to worry on the disk layout and how I'm going to spread the data files inside those layouts and so on and so forth. So we'll take care of that, right? So it's going to be fully automated. Here we would choose a database parameter profile, which probably would be pre-populated as well. Right? So you can create your own parameters profile depending on what type of databases you're going to be wanting to run inside of the VMs. And I'll go through that a little bit as we go through the profiles. And here you got listener port, some characters, encryption, pre and post commands. So the pre is any scripts you might want to run before the database is actually up and running. And the post ones are going to be once the database is up and running. We do see a lot of post commands being invoked when you're doing clones mostly, not so much during provisioning. Right? So I'm going to skip that part from the provisioning and then just move on forward. Time machine, now I'm tying my VM and my database into an SLA. Right? So if you recall, the other database that I had prod was 14 days retention. Then I would set up the snapshot time, now so on and so forth. Now, here you can tie, or you can put tags in cost center, department, and project. This would be very useful if you're using COM orchestration layers. That would reflect the pricing on for instance, on how much you're spending on using like database VMs inside of your environment. You can also use them, as filters if you're using Prism Central later on. Here you would see API equivalent. So every action that you take inside of an Era environment will have its API equivalent call. And this is a very nice feature if you're planning on doing private clouds or you're doing private cloud initiatives and you already have some sort of orchestration. You can just copy and paste all of this output on how to create a new database that is called so and so on that VM with the type of config, and you can later on invoke it and just call Era, and Era will take care of it. We do output all of the actions in different languages. So here you have the curl, the Python, the Golang, JavaScript, and PowerShell outputs on how you would actually call Era and get around producing this type of output. You can download it, right? So if you don't have an orchestration layer, but you want to download it to your desktop and just execute it later, that's how you can also go about it. So automation, it's also in there. So I just click next and let the creation of the VM run its course. Next, we're gonna go to Time Machine. Time Machine is, again, once I created a production database or a source database, I tie it up to an SLA. Now, Time Machine will pretty much show me in a graphical way, what do I have to restore or clone that database. For instance, so I return to my CRM database. Remember, it was a prod SLA. So I was retaining 14 days. So I can choose any point in time, right? Select it. Say, hey, you know what? I want to create a clone of this. So Era is gonna, track down the logs back up, the snapshots that I have. So here was the snapshot taken at 1 a.m. On the server, I can do the same thing. I can either choose to create a new server, which I'm gonna skip in this occasion, and I'm gonna mount this new database into an existing, database server. Database name, system ID, and then password. And I'm gonna change the schedule profile or just keep the same, really. So I could change it here if I wanted to have a dev test environment and I want to spread a clone out, off of one of the production databases. I could tweak the memory that the database is using. I could tweak, several parameters inside the environment. Two cool features: schedule the refresh and removal. Some of the pain points that we've seen on the field is, sometimes the database VMs as a sprawl and nobody knows what they were, created for, and they tend to forget. So let's say you have a consultant that is coming, for 15 days and he wants access to your databases, to take a look at, I don't know, normalizing your tables, right? So you can just leave a database there for 20 days because he's going to come in a couple of days, and he might need a couple of days extra. And you can say, let's say I want Era to refresh this clone, every day at midnight, right? And Era will take care of that. So now it is completely and fully scheduled. I don't have to do any hands-on. And we had several cases where customers were actually, avoiding refreshing their clone environments because it was really time-consuming. And now with this type of tools with Era, they just refresh them every single week in an automated and unattended fashion, right? And same story here. You got the pre and post command. Pre, again, is going to be once the clone is made before the creation of the database. The post is going to be done once the database is up and running, right? So again, if you're doing if you're doing table masking and that type of operations in some of the more sensitive fields, this is where you would invoke the scripts to go about it. Same thing with the tags, and you also see the API equivalent running here. So I'm just going to go for it, just let it do its thing, run its course, cloning one of the databases. Profiles, just going to run through them. So profile is a bundling of database, binaries, and OS, right? So we do provide some out-of-the-box profiles like Postgres. I think Chris, just announced that we will be supporting Postgres end-to-end with Era, right? So now you only have like one phone call away from getting support end-to-end to Postgres when it's running on top of a Nutanix cluster with Era. So we provide those profiles out of the box. Oracle, SAP HANA, and Microsoft SQL, you need to create your own profiles. We can do that either from a pre-existing database, and Era can extrapolate, the binaries and the config of the OS, or you can, if you have a template with the binaries of the database running on them, we can just use that and connect it and register it as a profile. Now, One of the powerful tools that the profile will give you is that the profile itself will also keep track of how many clones and VMs are using this profile. For instance, this one, the Microsoft SQL one, I've got 6 VMs or 6 databases that are using this profile. So I see here I got a dev availability group here in the Fin database servers. So if I click down on them and drill down, I see, well, first off, I see graphical information on how, how the database is laid out. So here you see I got 2 servers on this availability group, and I got 5 databases on them. And I can select here, for instance, software profile version to update the database, right? And apply service pack 1, service pack 2, whatever I want to apply on that. And you can also choose to do it now or choose to do it later. I think one of the more powerful, features of the patching when we're doing patching for databases is that we have a safe rollback process, right? So if the patch does not work and you're doing, let's say, a standalone database, so one database, one VM, we will power down the database, and let's say the patch doesn't work. Well, what Era is going to do is it's going to roll back to the previous version and bring back up the database. So by the end of the process, you're certain that your database is going to be up and running. Hence, now the process can become unattended. And to Chris's point, this is all about giving the DBAs their weekend back, right, or your weekend back. So this is about profiling and patching. You do bundle more stuff like you saw. So like the compute profile, we're going to create memory and compute count, configs, and you will just send that to the profiles as you provision them, the networking environments, database profiles. So here you would go about, for instance, if you're using SQL, you would create your instance parameter profile as well as your database parameter profiles. If you're doing Oracle, you can choose, what type of Oracle behavior you want your database to be running on, so on and so forth. And finally, Windows domains. So if you have more than one domain inside of the environment, so the DBAs have to span across multiple domains, here is where you would register them, and then you would just go about it. Database server VMs, I think I already went through it a little bit. I'm going to drop down onto the operations. So you see here, both operations finished, right? So as I was talking, Era was provisioning a single instance Oracle database up and running in about 6 minutes and 11 seconds, right? So it's a very even flow, and you see the same flow of the provisioning across all of the database engine. I think the other day I was just doing this demo for one of our customers, and the customer asked me to go off script. So he asked me to provision an SAP HANA environment, and I don't know anything about HANA, to be honest with you. And I was able to provision an SAP HANA with just a couple of clicks. It's the same workflow, as long as you got the profiles created, you can just come and provision SAP HANA and be certain that SAP HANA will have, best practices built into it. So the flow, is across all of the databases that we support. We do have more features in some databases than others. For instance, so patching is supported in Microsoft SQL, Oracle, and Postgres. We're always on the works to extend those features to other database engines, as well as adding extra database engines. So we just added SAP HANA as an example of that, and we're thinking of adding more databases, within the next 6 months. So the process was done here. Usually when you're provisioning an Oracle rack or a little bit more elaborate architecture, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes inside of this specific environment. And here you see the process of the cloning took less. And the reason behind that is because I used an existing VM, right? So I didn't have to provision a VM. What I just did is I actually just cloned the database itself, mounted on the new, on the pre-existing database server, and then I just went on applying the logs. So, the database would be up to a certain point in time. So from my side, that's all I have. If there are any questions, feel free to, shoot them and let us know. And that being said, I think I'm going to hand over to Chris. Chris, back to you.
Thank you for that great demo. So one thing I want to point out is just kind of want to do a roll-up of like the value of running Era database as a service on Nutanix is after that demo was to kind of show like the reason for that demo was to show how simple it was, like all the ways that automation play into deploying, cloning, removing the complexities of legacy infrastructure, and removing those silos, managing different heterogeneous database environments across any cloud or any area that you might have your database live. How simple that is. How fast it is to deploy. We have customers that have deployed, have improved the speeds of deploying databases to their test and dev environments by as much as 10x. So they're getting whole, cloned environments up that much faster. We're also showing from customers that have implemented Era, speeds of provisioning, just a pure database instance, have increased by as much as 97%. And then from looking at like a cost effectiveness, we talk about return on investment of 291%, and that comes from no longer having to do the large upfront capex purchases from an infrastructure perspective, because you just grow with this as your environment grows with no need to forklift upgrade. But then also the benefits of reducing off-hour workloads by as much as 50% for your teams, and then saving on costs from a pure database storage consumption from all your different clones and copies of databases, reducing that significantly by as much as 80%. So, these are significant numbers that from both a CapEx and OpEx perspective. And then being available and secure. Like I said, it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters unless your environment is up and running. It doesn't matter how fast it is if it's always going down. And it doesn't matter how good your environment is if you always are prone to security vulnerabilities. So, the ability to patch and keep your environment up and running and being able to do upgrades, software upgrades efficiently, and be able to manage that all from a central spot without taking downtime or minimum downtime if the patch requires a reboot, is significant in its own right. So that also points to cost effectiveness as well. But increasing that availability of your environment is a big part of what we do from Nutanix Era. So for more information, please go check out nutanix.com/era. But more importantly, we do have the ability to do a test drive. So that's actually where you can actually go to nutanix.com/test-era and kick the tires on the product. You can actually go through guided walkthroughs and actually demo what it's like to deploy, use deploy database, use the database profiles and network profiles to set up and configure a database. You can do an in-place restore of an environment. You can clone and refresh databases on the fly as you would in your own environment, and without having to take the time to set it up. Just go to that and register, and a link will be sent to you, and then you can log on with that link and username and try out all the different use cases, as well as patching is a use case as well. So please go out and try that and get any additional information. You can also have access to some of those data points that I was pointing to, or I was referring to from the Forrester TEI report, or we also have a technical baseline done by ESG that validates our performance claims and our scalability claims as well. So I'm just going to turn this back over to David and open it up for any questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great presentation. Love the live demo. That's really cool to see the product in action. So thank you so much, Damien, for taking time to do that. Seeing is believing, as they say. And so it was really impressive what you all have done with Era, how it continues to be improved and innovated over time. So thank you. We do have some questions for you. If you have a question for the Nutanix team about Era, now is the time to get it in. First question that I wanted to ask, I'll just throw this out to either one of you, and that is, how do you help customers get these benefits in their specific environments when they implement Era? Do you have a team behind that, or do you have steps or processes or documentation, or how do they really maximize this tool?
Do you want to take that, or do you want me to take it?
Well, Well, I can start. So the way we do, so there's a two track. I mean, we have to talk about two things, right? When we're talking about Era, the first one is getting databases on Nutanix, right? Either that being again with AHV and ESXi, and the second one is of course the deployment of Era itself. And and there's anything. I don't think there's anything else to it except just connect Era to your databases and to the Nutanix cluster, and off you go, right? So it's more about just move your database onto Nutanix cluster. What's insane there, just connect it to the environment, and yeah, I mean, you saw the workflow from there. It's very straightforward. It's very graphical. It's very intuitive and natural. So I want to say, most of the steps would be around about the migration on the database. I don't know, Chris, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would agree. The actual setup of Era is pretty simple. Assuming you have, the Nutanix environment there for you. But what we do have, we actually provide services that could assist an organization based on the requirements. So if a company is dealing with the database modernization effort and they're not only moving databases over to Nutanix, but updating the infrastructure, but they want to get their arms around management, we have services that can help them. So it's one thing to get Era set up, but then we can help you also walk through and set up your profile, so your company compliance policies, security policies, networking policies are all kind of baked into that. So when you go to deploy a database for the first time, or for the 100th time as you're deploying them out and cloning them, you actually have those best practices per the database engine for Nutanix and for your company's policies. So we have those services that could help out. So those are options as well.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like that could really help out a lot of companies to make this, so much easier to implement and get started. Next question I want to ask here is, how do you work with customers who are running databases in multiple environments? For example, SQL Server, Postgres, and Oracle.
I'll jump into that. So we actually find that when we're talking to a customer and we're working with them, even though they might be primarily one type of database, almost all the customers, at least I've talked to, have been a heterogeneous environment, right? And the perfect example of that is like they may have their their tier one applications on Oracle, but because the SQL Server is so pervasive, it's just all over the place. They're just applications are using SQL Server backends. The other thing that you see a lot too is if they're dipping their toe in the water and they're not completely open source, they may be running their tier two applications on like Postgres or MariaDB or MySQL. And so there's generally there might be a primary database engine that they're using, but it's generally always a heterogeneous environment. And so we support those right off the bat. Like we fully support Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, and then with the added 24/7 support of Postgres, MariaDB, MySQL, and with the 2.0, we added SAP HANA to that list. And we're going to continue to add additional database engines and extending that support as we continue to have releases. But I will also point out that don't get that confused by us supporting the basically the main databases out there at this point as being the only databases we support from an infrastructure perspective. That's specifically if you're going to be running databases as a service. But we have customers running DB2, right? We have MongoDB. We have that are running them. They're just not managing them with Era today.
Excellent. And then what about database availability? Can Era help companies to have higher uptime around their databases?
Absolutely. Damon, you want to jump in on that one?
No, well, yes.
No, I'll go.
So
Sorry.
yeah, go first, Chris. Go first, and then I'll compliment if I can add something.
Yeah, so at the 50,000 foot level, it's absolutely yes, and let's break that on how we can help with availability. One is just availability of the Nutanix platform, which is just proven worldwide over the last 10 years, just being a highly available platform to run any and all applications on, without you're not sacrificing availability and security for performance. There's no trade-off, right? And because it was built from the ground up, and our founders had the DNA of they came from like a cloud environments and distributed environments. They built that into the DNA of the company to, be able to scale out and scale up, in a fractional way. So in other words, taking those benefits of the cloud and putting them into the platform. So you're going to inherently in the platform itself, it is a very available and secure platform. When you take it a step further when managing it with Era, what we bring to the table as well is the ability to patch and maintain security, 0-day security vulnerabilities, or any type of bug fixes that are in there. You can deploy that and see which databases need it, which databases don't. A lot of times, what happens with environments that we walk into is that it's it's a management nightmare for patching databases, because you have so many different database profiles, or you may have running Oracle, but you have different flavors of that version of Oracle or database profiles because they have different levels of patching. And maybe for the same application that they're running on between dev and test and production, where they should be the same. So they run into problems of availability, not from a security threat, but they roll something out and it works in dev and test, and they roll it out production, and it's a completely, they take a performance hit or an outage because it was a different version. So we're able to manage that and kind of roll that down. And so you're avoiding the problems of inadvertently taking an environment down by patching it. So, and then of course, getting out of any security threats that could take your environment down as well. You're able to manage that and get those rolled out in a patch train.
Mm-hmm. And I think to add to that, you have the benefit that when we're provisioning, you're also, ensuring that you're applying best practices. So you're also mitigating a lot of the risk around, performance or performance hits that you might get from not applying best practices. In the particular case of Postgres and Microsoft SQL, when we're doing, always on availability group, we're also leveraging the database native tools. Same thing with Oracle RAC, right? So we're establishing, or we're setting up an ASM, file system in the Oracle cluster across multiple VMs. So on a higher application level, we are leveraging the application's, native tools, plus, all the added value that Chris and I just described, like ensuring that you got best practices, ensuring that the patching is going to be, easy, and that I have a safe rollback procedure, making sure that the infrastructure can accompany the database through all of its, performance, and also the resilience that a Nutanix infrastructure can provide for databases.
Excellent. And then another question here, they're asking, do I have to be running Nutanix on premises to use Nutanix Era?
No, well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention, you need to have a Nutanix cluster. We do, or we're about to GA, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but we're about to GA, clusters on Amazon. So pretty much you're just running a Nutanix cluster. I'm sorry?
Yeah, it's already GA. It's already available.
Cool. So you can run clusters, Nutanix clusters on Amazon, and have that, and Era will natively work on it as well. So not only you can have your on-prem, Nutanix clusters, you can have now that in Amazon. You also can, as we support more cloud deployments, it will become available across different clouds.
Nice. Yeah, that's
we,
very cool.
We announced about 2 weeks ago, we announced the future support for Azure as well. So definitely the requirement is to be on Nutanix, infrastructure, but it doesn't have to be in the near future on premises.
Excellent. And then I know we're running out of time here, but before we go, I wanted to, just kind of wrap back up or circle back to the Nutanix test drive here. Is that the best way to get started learning and trying out Era?
Definitely in trying out Era, because there's no requirements to implement anything on your environment. You can get a feel of the workflow. It's a perfect example to actually have hands-on experience, to go through the workflows, to deploy a database, to patch a database, to clone it and refresh and do an in-place restore. So definitely get the feel and ease of an actual workflow. And then going at, next step would be, so you get more information, go check out nutanix.com/era, so you can kind of get additional details on that. And, you can actually see what other customers are doing. You can see use cases and kind of, and get some data points on what peers in the industry are experiencing with the product.
Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have for our Q&A session here. But Chris and Damien, really excellent presentation and demo. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you to Nutanix for supporting today's event. And of course, big thank you out there to our audience for supporting the webinar today. Lots of great questions coming in. We do appreciate that. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Visa $300 gift card. That's going to Brian Sequira. Forgive me if I mispronounce it. Sequira from Kentucky. Congratulations, Brian from Kentucky. We'll reach out to you. And for everyone else out there, of course, don't forget about the Nutanix Era test drive. The link there is in the handouts tab, as well as the Nutanix Era solutions brief. So make sure that you download those before you go. I hope that you learned a lot. I know that I did. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.